I hope you are ready for another episode of RT Sidebar. It's going to be a fantastic episode. Mindy just finished with a patient. So look out. I like your little cubicle area. You
A
look
little
beautiful as
office.
always. I love it. The oxygen tank behind you is just like key. That makes you just like perfect. That's
You
RT.
never know. You never
That
know when they're going to come on an O2 and their tank's out. So
that
I
is
have to have
true.
it, or if I have to give a neb, because I've done that too.
RT all day, Mindy. That's what
Yep.
you are. RT all day. Hey, I heard a good big thing about APRT. I heard about North Carolina.
North Carolina. Yep.
North
Let's
Carolina
go.
passed APRT legislature 2 weeks ago, which is
Mhm.
phenomenal. Mindy, you seeing an uptick in Ohio State applications right now?
Yeah. I think they'll be taking more this year. Hopefully, fingers crossed.
That is awesome. And as always, JJ the RT.
What is up, you guys?
How's it going, brother?
Man, just got out of class, doing my best to get some of this done in my lunch break.
There you go, my friend. We will keep you moving. So we have an exciting episode today, a different episode for RT Sidebar because we usually keep it leadership. We usually kind of keep it a little less clinical, but this time we're going to keep it super clinical with our friends from Beyond Air. We have Steve Lisi. Welcome to RT
Hey,
Sidebar, CEO of Beyond Air.
thank you, thank you.
He's been there for 8 years. Steve, we met through Joe, as most people do. So it's great to have you. I'm super excited. When I first talked to you, you said, Matt, we can't have a podcast without Fred Montgomery. Like, you just can't do it because he is the pioneer. He basically makes nitric oxide in his shed out back. That's what I heard. That's what I heard. Fred Montgomery, the VP of Medical Systems, which is basically R&D at Beyond Air, but you've been involved with nitric oxide since 1993, which I believe, what didn't it win a Nobel Prize in 1992 or something? Is that correct?
Yes, it was a Nobel Prize winner for innovation in science.
That's amazing. So today we talk about empowerment. So we have champion, empower, influence. This is an empowerment episode. Mindy loves empowerment episodes. JJ absolutely does. And the reason why we wanted to bring you guys on is because nitric oxide is a respiratory. That's a respiratory drug. That's our gas. Don't touch our gas. That's our gas. Right? That sounded awful. But it is ours. I remember the first time, like I've always given nitric oxide. I kind of, give it here. I worked in the NICU, so it was perfectly fine. And I remember the first time that I gave nitric oxide in the adults, and they were freaking out. They're like, you must sit here and never move because this nitric oxide is going to do something magical. Like, I know it's going to do something magical. Steve's laughing. We know it's going to do something magical, but it's not hard to do. But it does freak a little people out because sometimes, when you're on nitric, I mean, you guys have put patients on nitric,
Mhm.
like they're pretty sick usually, and you
Yeah.
want to make sure that they're better. So we're so excited to have Fred and Steve here. They're going to talk to us a little bit about nitric, and then we're going to get into some of the fun things that maybe respiratory therapists will be doing in the future. So, Fred, I'm going to start with you, my friend. Where did nitric oxide come from?
Well, in nature, nitric oxide actually is synthesized during lightning strikes. The lightning ionizes the gas in the air, which is nitrogen and oxygen. It breaks it down into individual atoms of oxygen and nitrogen, and they reform and make nitric oxide. So it's in nature, it's a kind of a natural process of storms. In the cylinder nitric oxide that you get in the hospitals, that comes from a kind of a nitric acid reaction, which
Okay.
makes pure nitric oxide. So what you originally start with is 99.99% nitric oxide in a cylinder, and then you blend it down with nitrogen to get the 800 parts per million that typically gets shipped out to the hospitals for clinical use.
So I always see that big tank, and there's like 3 atoms in that whole tank. That are coming out.
Yeah, it's the most inefficient drug packaging you can imagine. It's kind of like 44 pounds of stainless steel and aluminum, and there's kind of like, less than a gram of nitric oxide in it. But
Yeah.
that's the reality of today's yesterday's nitric oxide.
Yesterday's
Today's
nitric
nitric
oxide.
oxide is, we make it at the bedside with the lung fit pH. So we're trying to simplify it for you.
So you make it with lightning. That's all I heard, Steve. The first time we met, you said we make nitric oxide with lightning, and I'm like, I am in. Let's watch this now. Like, like you got
I
me.
said lightning in a bottle, and I got rebuffed by the engineers. I tried.
See, that is so awesome. So Steve, how did you get involved in nitric oxide?
I researched, for my former career before I came to the healthcare world. I was an investor and researched all different kinds of therapies. And in the 90s, we researched nitric oxide. I thought it was really amazing, but all the money went to genomics because they mapped the human genome back in the 90s. So that's where all the money went. So nitric was kind of left for dead for a while, other than the delivery system that Fred and his colleagues had developed back in the 90s. And I was reintroduced to nitric oxide about 10 years ago by a gentleman who was trying to use it to treat respiratory infections. And I said, well, I remember this. So I kind of got a little bit more into the details of it, and I thought it was amazing. And I met Fred and his partner, and I said, wow, if we could generate it from ambient air, that can change the world. So that's kind of why I jumped on and came on to be the CEO of the company. Was a combination of high concentration nitric oxide, 200 parts per million, give or take, versus the 20 that it's approved for today. So much higher concentration. How do we do that without causing NO2 issues or methemoglobin issues? And how do we do it in the home? How do we treat respiratory infections in the hospital and the home, not just in the ICU? And enter Fred and his partners, and you have a generator, and that solves the problem. And we can get into a little detail later on if you'd like about how we solve the methemoglobin issue.
I was watching The Pit. JJ, Mindy, have you been watching The Pit?
Yep.
So
I
last
am
night,
not.
when I was watching it, patient came in, blue is blue, and they had methemoglobinemia. I'm like, wow, you're pulling one out of the textbooks for that one. I think there's like 4 people on the planet and every respiratory therapist that knows what methemoglobinemia is. But they brought the methylene blue, so life was good.
Yeah,
I'm like, all right, that was good. So Fred, you've been there since the beginning. Datex, Omida, when you started doing this, it was discovered and then it had to get to market. Like, how did that all happen? Like,
Well, there was an anesthetist called Warren Zapol who was doing some research in it was a lamb model of a neonate, and he was showing that you could deliver nitric oxide and get pulmonary vasodilation and improved blood flow to this lamb model of a newborn. And he filed a patent back in '91, and he was promoting and he was trying to find a commercial partner to actually bring it to market and get it through the FDA approval process. And he came to the company that I worked for, which was called BOC. And BOC was kind of unique in the sense that it had a pharmaceutical division, it had a medical equipment division, and it had a specialty gases division that was making nitric oxide. And so it had the 3 elements that were really needed to kind of bring this through clinical studies and into the market. And I worked for the Medical Systems Group. Once the BOC board approved the development of nitric oxide, we started work on a delivery system for use in the clinical studies. And within 6 months of the start of the program, we had our first baby enrolled in the study. So I came on board for nitric oxide in November of '93, and in April of '94, we had our first patient treated. So it was a very quick development program. You couldn't do that now, but
I was just going to say,
Yeah.
Fred, it just tells you how much times have changed from like a thought to being developed to then 6 months being on a patient. 6 months later being on a patient or a patient enrolled in the study is so quick. That turnaround time is so unique to what, clinicians or research folk may be used to now. So it almost reminds me like during COVID when we had so many policy changes like every day.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? Like you didn't have to go through all the red tape in order to get something approved. So like how has that changed? How has that like all of the red tape changed for you and what you do?
well,
I saw
it's kind of
Steve
like
had
night and
some
day, to be
heartburn.
honest. I mean, we've been trying to get a protocol approved for a viral pneumonia study in the US, and we did a study in viral pneumonia in Israel, and it went through, and we used it with the nitric oxide generator, and we were delivering 160 parts per million, or 150 parts per million, I should say. But just getting the FDA to even approve the study has been we've failed to do it. We're going to try again, but in the future. But it's how long have we been trying, Steve, to get that study approved? But it's years. It's been years. We've
Not,
been
I think the first time we approached them was 2019. There's
my
just
God.
not an understanding of you guys. You were saying methemoglobinemia. I mean,
Mhm.
you think you guys don't really know about it because it rarely ever happens. Imagine FDA's understanding of what truly methemoglobinemia is and what damage it can do. I mean, you need to really have your methem levels up at 30 or 40 before you have to worry about anything seriously damaging. And you'll like you said, they'll turn blue before anything bad happens, and you have an antidote. That's been a discussion for several years, and even NO2 levels. Um, I don't want to have flashbacks for Fred, but someone threw a 1963 rabbit study at us to ask questions, and we're like, "What? 1963 rabbit studies to talk about NO2? What?" I mean, we just don't know what to do sometimes. So it's just really a misunderstanding of nitric oxide, what the benefits are, the half-life, how quickly it dissipates. What does NO2 really do to a patient, or the medical staff? What's been the exposure? I mean, with these cylinders and the systems you've been using for the past 25 years, what's really been the exposure in the room? I don't think anybody truly knows, but you really have to get the high levels of NO2 for a consistently long period of time to cause damage to someone. So that understanding of safety is just not institutionalized. It's just not. I mean, we're using old OSHA guidelines and things that really don't understand when someone's ill and has a condition. You don't really have to worry about some of these things. So, methemoglobinemia, I mean, you can look at the literature. You really need to be above 20% methemoglobin to really start causing problems with a patient. And I can tell you that regulatory authorities are well below that level.
yeah.
And it's very
I
frustrating
mean,
for us
Yeah.
to be able
even our
to move
treatments for
forward.
viral pneumonia, when we were doing 150 parts per million, the methemoglobin didn't go above 5% in most of these patients. So they're very low levels. But
I know.
Yeah, when you're
I know the
talking
first
about
time.
non-tuberculous speckled bacteria, you want to go
Yeah.
higher. Sorry, Mindy.
Yeah. Oh, it's okay. I was going to say the first time I ever hooked up nitric oxide was actually when I worked in a cardiac ICU during H1N1 back in 2011, 29, one of those years. Anyway, I hooked it to an oscillator. So that's not traditional that we use for adult patients, right? It's usually pediatric. But she was a severe case of H1N1. I hooked up the nitric for the first time to the oscillator for the very first time.
Mhm.
Talk about shaking in your boots. That'll get you nervous. But that was to treat that virus there. And then I do remember the facility I worked at, we did a study during COVID with the nasal cannula nitric to see if it would benefit patients being on that study. I don't know what particular study it was. I can't remember offhand, but we did a study on nitric that way.
I think, and Mindy, this is a perfect transition. Is I'm a neonatal guy. It's always been approved for me. I can put it on everybody. It's been great for me.
Yeah.
But when we talk about the boom of nitric oxide, I think it's really when that cardiac indication started to come into play. I remember H1N1 too. That's when I got called to the ICU to put nitric on an adult patient. So we started talking a little bit about the red tape of the FDA, but tell us a little bit about that cardiac indication, because I'm not sure every respiratory therapist truly understands
it. Was that
You
question
want
to
me to
me?
say it, Tom?
whatever. Whoever.
Well,
It's not for me.
Let's
That's for
first,
sure.
I'm going to let Fred go, but I just want to be clear that in the U.S. there is no cardiac indication on
Here we
label,
go.
right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Only every other country in the world has it on label, just not the U.S. So
Yeah.
we're
So
talking about it in
in
that
Europe,
context.
it's on label. In Australia, it's on label. In Japan, it's on label, but not here in the US. But its major application in cardiac is the same as the neonate. It's as a selective pulmonary vasodilator, and when you come off bypass, you can often get pulmonary hypertension, and that's associated with free heme. So when a blood vessel gets burst, the hemoglobin goes into the plasma, and it becomes significantly more reactive to the endothelial cells. So it mops up the nitric oxide that's been naturally produced in the blood vessels, and you can get this pulmonary hypertension associated with that. Whereas so if you start delivering nitric oxide, you supplement that, you react the free hemoglobin, and you restore the pulmonary vasodilation, and you keep the pulmonary blood pressure down. So that's its primarily, what it's used for in the cardiac indication, and typically they would be on it for a day or so back in the cardiac ICU. But so it's supplementing the body's natural nitric oxide in a situation where there's a deficit.
Are there
Right.
big
I mean, I've had patients who've come in and we put them. They've have a severe history of pulmonary hypertension, and we've had to put them on nitric oxide to stabilize them until we can transition them to their pump, their Flowland pump that they had there. So, I mean, it's kind of off-label use, like he said, but it does work in those critical care settings.
Yeah.
That's where I've always found nitric oxide to be interesting. It's like a wonder drug, and if it's going to work right off the bat. You flip it on, you're going to see
That's the thing.
results.
Quickly.
Like real quickly. But if you don't see results real quickly, you turn it off. Like that's how I've always done it. JJ, is that how you've done it?
So I didn't always have it readily available at the hospital that I worked at the most. COVID, we started to use it a whole lot more, again, off label, but we knew from the increase in PBR secondary to our blood gas results, we knew that there was some pulmonary hypertension. And it's so funny. I remember, we were getting to a place to where we were starting to pull it out more with our COVID patients when they were extremely ill. And I had patient on the ventilator that was maxed out on all the things that I could do. And I was getting nitric set up. Now, I didn't have an order for it, but I was getting everything set up to be that next step. And it was a resident that kind of got bent out of shape that I was pulling it out. I was pulling it out to get it set up for it to be my next move. And like it kind of went up the chain to the director and everybody else, but it was like, look, I'm setting up to take care of my patient. I know I don't have an order currently, but I know that this is my next step. It's almost like saying I'm not going to have an ambu bag at the bedside whenever I have an intubated patient. Like I knew that this was going to be our next move. I'm just preparing. And so like I have some fun stories about like getting my hand slapped, but I also have stories of like when we did start this on a couple of patients, we were able to see drastic changes in their blood gases and drastic improvement in their hemodynamics. And it was a big change. And like you said, if there was something that was going to happen, if there was going to be changes, it happened relatively quickly. Like within the first 2 hours, you knew that there was going to be changes. And if you didn't, then okay, take it off. And we're on to our next one to see if we can get this patient on ECMO or transferred out or whatever. So I have a couple of just, different stories.
I have one from COVID where a therapist called me to the ICU one day and he goes, I need you to talk to this resident. And I'm like, well, why? He goes, just come up and talk to him. I'm like, all right. So I did. I wandered up. I'm a director, so I'm in a suit. I gown off, and I'm like the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. I had so much garb on, and they're like, the therapist won't turn off the oxygen. I'm like, okay, well, why? He says it doesn't go any higher than 100. I go, that's why I'm in the ICU. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. They're like, well, what can we do? And we were using a lot of nitric as well. At some point, if you're on 100% FiO2, you have to assume you're going to have some pulmonary vascular resistance, right? That's just physiology. I'll go to Mindy because it's been a long time since I took physiology.
I mean, I just got done teaching it. Like,
there you go.
When you have hypoxemia, when you have hypercarbia, those are going to impact your pH. All three of those will impact your PVR. If your PVR is increased, your pulmonary artery pressure is going to be elevated. You're going to have backup of the right ventricle, right atrium, SVC, IVC, all of the things that we know that's associated with, chronic vent failure or even acute vent failure. We know, and I don't have to have a Swan-Ganz to tell me exactly all of those things. But now we have ultrasound, and ultrasound can do a lot of measurements too. So the more versed that we get with our tools at the bedside, nitric and ultrasound, and understanding how that pathophysiology works, we understand what the reverse is when we have a pulmonary vasodilator.
Bingo. And I think that's, the tools in the toolbox that you just said, nitric and a lung ultrasound and an ultrasound in one in each hand. I could get some damage done. I could do some things. So that's awesome. The controversy about nitric is this. Everybody knows it. It's expensive. The NICU gets mad when you take it from them. It has boomed quite a bit since you started the initial trials with babies. Nitric oxide is big business now, and there's some competition. So I want to get into not only what does the future look like, but what does the present day look like? So you and Steve, what does present day nitric oxide look like for you guys every day when you're helping your customers take care of patients?
Well, I mean, look, I think going back, why is there so much off label usage? And part of that reason was in the late 90s. I think there was over 400 hospitals doing research in various aspects of nitric oxide. It was a real boom time for clinical studies in all manner of different indications. And one of those was cardiac. And there was a lot of studies that showed the benefit of it that were published in the late 90s. And I think it became part of the established practice very early on. And so those hospitals that had kind of been at the forefront of that research, they carried on using it. And when I was at Ino Therapeutics, which was the forerunner of Mallinckrodt, 70% of the usage was in the off-label area. There was only about 30% of the usage that was actually in the neonates. So it was a big piece. I don't know if we have the numbers for today, Steve, but it's probably similar.
Or a little higher than 70.
Yeah.
I mean, look. You know, the situation today is, you know, the respiratory departments of, you know, in the hospitals in the U.S. I know everyone else feels like the pandemic was a long time ago, but I'm sure you're still feeling some effects of it. Your hospitals are not like they were in 2019, and they may never go back.
Right.
And you know, and I'm sure a lot of other medical device manufacturers out there can feel the same pain we feel with supply chains, are still having long lead time items that are just not back to what they were beforehand. So the world is very different, and I think you know, our system, the lung fit pH, is there to do a couple of things. You mentioned, Matt, it's a very expensive, big business. You know, it doesn't cost a lot to make it from the air we breathe, right? So we've taken a big chunk out of the costs, which are being passed along to hospitals. But another thing is, you know, we're the new kid on the block, right? So it takes time for people to get comfortable. And
Good point.
you know, the first day the machine was approved, I don't think it was ready for prime time on day one. What first generation medical device is ready for prime time day one, right? So I think that we've gone through the process of listening to some of the early hospitals that helped us and came out with an updated version of our first generation machine last year in May. And this one has really been taking hold with people. And I think it's the answer. I think it's the transition away from cylinders. Why do you want to deal with those things? Right? They are a hazard, right? I mean, how many RTs you guys know? Oh, my shoulder's hurting, my back's hurting. I had to lift that cylinder, I had to reach around the back. You know, these are things that people don't realize. I mean, just drop it on your toe. I mean, this is not a good thing. So, I mean, you know, these things have happened. You're laughing. You know, I'm sure you can tell stories about what's
because we
happened with
know.
these cylinders, right? So, exactly.
I just
That's all
remember
gone.
having to go grab tanks from the dungeon of the hospital because that's
Oh,
where
yeah.
you store all your tanks, right? So you have to go from the
Yeah.
medical ICU or the cardiac ICU, which is 2 hospitals away from where we store them. And it takes time. And then by the time you get up, you're all sweaty because you have to pull them. It's just so a tankless option would be very, very nice.
it's a hot
We've
mess.
had, yeah, we've had some of that. And again, I'm just telling a story here. I'm not trying to promote anything, just to be clear. But you know, we've had people tell us stories. Hey, look, I leave the lung fit in the corner of the cardiac OR. I just let it sit there. You know, it's plugged in and you know, just you know, not working. But hey, if we need it, just roll it over and set it up, and boom, within a minute or two, you're going. You don't have to call, like you're saying, Mindy. You don't have to call down to a mile and a half away, underground tunnels, then come up, cross over roads, and finally get there. And you got to find an RT who can go grab it, because not every RT is certified to go into the dungeon and grab the cylinder. So
Wade through all the
got
vagabonds that are there, everything.
Oh my God, it's horrible.
Yeah,
So
usually it's the charge therapist who has to go down because be like, because I was a charge therapist, so I know you get that phone call. Hey, we're going to start
Same.
nitric on 11 ICU. Can you bring me some tanks? Or they ran out of tanks and they need new tanks, and it's a whole process. And the whole time you're walking down, your phone is ringing because you're needed elsewhere, and you know you really need this nitric because we can't stop it.
And it's always in an
Yeah.
old
You
bomb
know what?
shelter.
As a kind of a product developer, it was the worst thing of designing the device was having to interface these two 44-pound cylinders into the car. And you know, you've got the high pressure regulators, you've got the hosing. It's all kind of in terms of human factors and making it easy. It was a nightmare because you've got to purge those lines. You've got to get the NO2 out of it. And now, you know, with the Beyond Air device, you know, there's no nitric oxide anywhere in the system until you turn the dosing on, and it
see the
starts
cylinder?
generating it just
This
the
is the
right
cylinder.
amount. Yes.
It's
This-
lightning
what
lightning
it's
in a
holding
cartridge.
is less than a deck of cards.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like it's
Yeah,
It's
it's
in-
2
that's
ounces. You
amazing.
know, this is your NO2 filter. That's all you need. Every 12 hours, you pop a new one in, no matter what. Every 12 hours, boom, boom. It's 5 seconds and you're done.
It looks
Okay.
like 2 Keurig
Mindy.
cups, like side by
Keurig
side.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I think this is an important piece, though. So, you know, obviously nitric oxide is an RT thing. Like nobody knows about the dungeon other than RTs. That's just how that is. But for all manufacturers out there, doesn't matter who you're affiliated with, make stuff easy to use because we don't have time. to screw around and find tanks, or, oh, I'm missing this little widget that somebody pulled off that's over there somewhere, or I need to find the cylinder room key. Like that always got lost. Those are like whatever you can do to make RT's lives easier. I think that should, like, if you just, that's your mission for every medical device manufacturer, I think you'll win. What I really want to get into, and I'm super excited about, is this.
Yeah.
Is I learned that nitric oxide has other applications. That the innovation on nitric oxide goes beyond what a normal RT does, but it could be a space for an RT in the future. So, Fred, tell us one of those things that are outside of the box that you told me about not that long ago of where nitric oxide's going.
Yeah, so, when I first joined Beyond Air, was it 2017, Steve? Something like that. They were interested in the lung infection market for chronic lung infections, as well as for viral pneumonia, COVID-19 and others. And so the first product we actually developed was not the LungFit PH. It was the LungFit Pro, which was to deliver nitric to spontaneously breathing patients that were breathing through a face mask. And we developed that product. It's been used in clinical studies in both Australia and Israel. And in Australia, it was actually used in the patient's home. The patients took the device. They dosed themselves twice a day for 12 weeks, I think it was. 12 weeks was the study period. And trying to get these devices back from them, these patients had chronic NTM, and so they'd been losing lung function over time, and they were kind of getting into critical situations where they were less mobile, they hard getting the breath, and they saw, we saw significant quality of life improvements. They were feeling better after this 12-week treatment. So that was one of the indications that patients with these chronic lung infections like NTM that are kind of spiraling downhill, basically, but we were able to treat them in their home. So it obviously had to be fairly simple. But they put a face mask on. It was a 40-minute treatment twice a day, so it wasn't too excessive. But that was one indication where we're studying, and we hope to keep moving forward when the company has the resources to run these studies.
When the FDA decides to allow you in the building to do this study.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry, guys, because it's all of our pain.
Yeah, our first FDA approach was with bronchiolitis. So before the NTM study, we did bronchiolitis. So this, obviously, it's majority RSV, about 75% is RSV, and then other viruses, of course, including coronaviruses. So we had done 3 studies in bronchiolitis. So these are 3, 4, 5-month-old babies, and extremely safe, great results. As soon as the pandemic hit, that program was scrapped. Right, I don't think there was a bronchiolitis case for the first 2 years. So, right, you could sequester your 3-month-old, 2-month-old, so they never got sick. So, it's been kind of thrown into a tough situation. So we transitioned to try to, transition to adult viral infection setting with COVID to try to help out. But again, we were kind of rebuffed to help with the pandemic from that perspective. But we did do a study in Israel in COVID patients, and it turned out to be very well received. Results were good. We had strong reductions in oxygen use, both in the hospital and at home. Remember, before the pandemic, you didn't really send people home on oxygen. The pandemic came, you sent everybody home on oxygen, right? So we were measuring the oxygen usage in the hospital and at home, and it was significantly reduced when you're using nitric. That was 150 parts per million. And what Fred was talking about with NGM, that was 250 parts per million of nitric oxide, 40 minutes. We did an induction phase of 4 times a day for 2 weeks, and then twice a day for 10 weeks. And for the respiratory therapist, this is, when you're treating these NTM patients, and these are all chronic refractory. They're refractory to multiple antibiotics at that point when they get nitric. Coming in, explaining to the patients how to use nitric, how to use the machine. We even had a situation where we were sending RTs, or I guess the equivalent of RTs, out in Australia with the patients to train them at home, make sure they used it right the first time at home. We could have them check up on them. This is something very interesting. I think it's a different world for RTs to actually make a house call. But in the future, our vision is to actually have this machine in patients' homes with chronic refractory lung infections, not just NTM, but maybe Pseudomonas, maybe a fungal infection of some sort. This is something where an on-site RT in someone's home who's visiting every month or every 3 months, or maybe when the patients come in, they're looking at the patients, gathering data from our machine, and really helping the patients to move along, not just acute care in the hospital, but chronic care. Again, this is our vision, and hopefully we get there. We know we have something that works based on the study we did in Australia. Now it's just like Fred said, getting the funding and expanding.
Do you feel like this could be something that could benefit patients who have severe pulmonary hypertension at home? Like they could use the nitric at home?
We've
I'll let
we
Fred
did some
answer that.
studies very early on with pulsing technology. So when the patient breathed in, the reduced pressure in the nasal cannula was monitored, and that triggered a pulse of nitric oxide. So it was like the guy who kind of filed some patents on it, he called it, well, that's what happens when you smoke. You take a drag of your cigarette and then you inhale it at the leading edge of your breath and take all that nicotine down into your lungs. And this was the concept where you detected the start of inspiration and you gave a pulse of nitric oxide, so it went down and was absorbed into the lung, and you got your pulmonary vasodilator. And we were studying patients with primary pulmonary hypertension. So these were typically there were ladies that used drugs like fen-phen as a kind of a diet drug, and then they'd had this kind of side effect of pulmonary hypertension associated with it. And we got good results. Then the kind of the prostacyclins kind of came along, and it was somewhat easier or it was, they didn't have to handle the cylinders in the home, which was what the technology was at that point. Now that we've got this, this technology where we can generate it from the room air, it may be possible to kind of revisit that market. But it's certainly possible.
Yeah, I think that would be definitely something to revisit. But I also think when you guys are talking about having an RT at home, you think about, we're trying to get this legislation passed to have RTs in home for oxygen, right? And get billing for that. I think this would be a great outlet to add to that, to show that we do need respiratory therapists in our homes for some of our patients who cannot travel all the time to come to get checked up in a clinic setting.
I agree, Mindy. The hospital at home model was really highlighted during COVID. And I think that the more patients that we can treat at home, so whether it's for a lung infection, whether it's for pulmonary hypertension, whether it's oxygenation, whatever it is, you can still get the same outcome with very limited safety and efficacy concerns. Like that's the way I've looked at it. So I want to go into this one because I think this is super RT cool. Is Steve, right at the beginning of the program, we were talking about ECMO and sweep gas. Tell me a little bit about what you're learning about that, because I think, there's a lot of RTs out there that do ECMO, and this might give them a little bit of an edge.
Well, yeah, people have been talking to us about using LungFit PH, and obviously if someone's on ECMO, they're probably already getting nitric through the vent, but here they're putting nitric oxide into the sweep gas. So Fred mentioned earlier about the interaction with free hemoglobin. So nitric is an anti-inflammatory, right? So we put it in there, and it will have this anti-inflammatory effect in the sweep gas circuit. It will protect this circuit and elongate its life. So you're not changing. Hopefully, you don't have to change the circuit while the patient's on ECMO. So this is the main, at least what I've been told is the main benefit. But again, if you're stopping coagulation, there could be downstream benefits where you're using, less heparin or less other anticoagulants, whatever you're using besides heparin. And there could be other outcomes that need to be studied and need to be looked at. But just the fact that you can, increase the life of that sweep gas circuit, I think that's a great place to start with the benefits of nitric. And again, no cylinders, right? You just have that filter. You're changing every 12 hours. No big deal. It's very easy to use. And there are people who've been talking about the simplicity of hooking it up to the circuit with the LungFit pH. So this is discussion's been going on for several months about this, and I'm sure there are colleagues of yours who probably know way more than I do about it. But we're very happy to respond to the needs and demands of the respiratory community, and so we're just responding and trying to help in any way that we can. So Fred, I don't know if you have any more on this topic.
No, it's been used in ECMO for quite a long time, as just in the cardiac indication as well. There were plenty of studies where they were delivering it to the sweep gas while they were on the membrane oxygenators during cardiac surgery as well. So it's got a long history of it.
That is pretty cool. I know
could be a price and an ease of use issue, right? Could be all of a sudden the price is right and the ease of use. That could just be why it's picking up steam.
Sure, and changing an ECMO circuit is a dangerous activity. End of story. That's what it is. It's a dangerous activity, and sometimes you have to do it, and sometimes you have to do it in a hurry. So whatever you can do to maintain that circuit, it's almost like maintaining their own cardiopulmonary system. So you just have to kind of take really good care of it. I know you guys are looking at oncology. You guys are looking at different things. We could talk all day, but I just really just wanted to say nitric oxide's kind of a wonder drug, and it's kind of owned by RT, and it's kind of awesome. That's what I have. JJ, final thoughts, my friend?
Yeah, so when it comes to this, for practitioners that don't have it readily available, to be able to come to a place to where we have two key resources here that we could just say, what would I want to do to make this as simple as possible for somebody that doesn't use it very often, right? What would that look like if I were to design, and that's what you guys are doing, is creating a design that is so simple that somebody that hasn't used it and learned about it 15 years ago could pick up and run with it tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that I think is the coolest that is taking place. And some of those human factors that we talked about with the moving around a tank and having to haul a tank and being able to switch to a smaller cartridge is so innovative. It's so different. It is building for the future. So some of the things that I really like is that you guys are making a big change from some of the issues and concerns that we have had, and you're making it simple for somebody that hasn't used it in 10, 15 years. So those are some of the big things that I really appreciate. I love the idea of using it in the home setting. Recently, I was actually teaching a ventilator class to home health nurses. So to be able to put, hey, nitric could be a place that you could go in the future, and to have that in my back pocket for that workshop would be another avenue that I think would lead to more education to that arena of home health, and just continuing to understand and continue to share the knowledge and make it seem less daunting and less scary. I know it is scary because these are our sickest of the sick, but making the usage of it less scary, I think, is something that you guys are doing a phenomenal job with. So keep up doing what you're doing. You're making waves in the direction that we love to see.
I love this. Hey, great episode, guys. Steve, Fred, so good. I mean, I learned a lot.
Thanks for the invite.
It's pretty nice, isn't it? It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So I just want to tell all the Barflies worldwide out there, it's spring conference season. Mindy, I get to see you next week.
I know. Are you excited?
I'm very excited. It's going to be wonderful. New York State Society for Respiratory Care in Batavia, New York, which is between Rochester and Buffalo. Mindy and I will be there. Mindy, of course, is the keynote speaker. You know, I'm like sometime in the afternoon when everybody's asleep. It's usually always after lunch they put me on. But we're going to be there. We're there with Becky. It's going to be fantastic. Then we have the VSRC, and then our big one. We go down to visit JJ. Mindy and I are going down to the TSRC annual meeting where we do leadership seminars. We have podcast recordings. We have lectures. We're doing all this awesome stuff. JJ, you and I have summer forum where we get to tackle Lori Tinkler and have, live with Lori. So that's always fun. If you want to learn more about the technology that Beyond Air does and the equipment that they use and the ease of use, please go to lungfitph.com. That is lungph.com. You do a really great job there. And Steve and Fred, thank you so much for being on. I love this. JJ, shout out time, bro.
Oh man, shout outs. I've got to give the shout out to Emily Lamarina. She was on a virtual call with not only my class, but Amanda Nichols' class, who was a guest recently. And she hammered out a pediatric lecture and had some interactive scenarios, and the students really appreciated it. And, she's one of our phenomenal leaders in respiratory. And for her to speak and to carve out some time for, the future of respiratory, I really appreciate. So appreciate you, Emily.
She has so much energy too. So much energy.
She
Mindy,
does.
who you got?
Susan Parsons Hunter. So I recently was a keynote speaker at Tennessee Society State Conference a couple weeks ago, and you talk about Southern hospitality. She was fantastic, so welcoming, and she even made me a little badge to go on my badge that was in the shape of Tennessee. That said APRT. So she wants me to wear that everywhere I go so I don't forget where that came from. So shout out to Susan.
That is so awesome. Fred, make sure you shout out the right person first.
Yeah, well, I've got to initially shout out my wife, who's been my rock and helped really support my career, even moving countries to do so. So I've got to say that. But professionally, I would like to shout out Warren Zapol, who was did some early research in inhaled nitric oxide at Massachusetts General. He filed a patent on nitric oxide as a selective pulmonary vasodilator, and it was that patent which allowed the licensing, which allowed the clinical studies and the approval. We wouldn't have nitric oxide as an approved indication for the drug without his initial efforts. So my shout out goes to him.
Thank you, Warren. We appreciate you. Steve?
Well, I'm just shocked that Fred's accent's not from Wisconsin. Just learned that now.
I know. That's what I've been thinking. Fred's lived in Wisconsin a long time. That's all I'm going to say.
So my shout outs to all the nitric oxide. Yeah. My shout outs to all the nitric oxide believers out there. I mean, from the Nobel Prize winners right up to the Warren Zapol and Fred himself and his colleagues, and the people who are believers now, they know what nitric oxide is capable of at different concentrations. So everybody out there who's pushing forward, not just in cardiac or ECMO sweep gas or in cancer or in respiratory infections, wound healing, there's a lot of places where nitric oxide works. And that for all those people out there who are pushing forward, who know it's going to change the world, that's who my shout outs to. And I really appreciate everybody.
Steve, Fred, it's been a pleasure. So glad for you guys to be on RT Sidebar. My shout outs to my wife, because I don't want to get outdone by Fred, because my wife does listen. So Heather, shout out to you, my darling. Hey, great episode as always. Stay tuned for all of your RT Sidebar fun on any of your podcasts, YouTube, all of the clips that we have. Guys, thank you once again. And as we always finish up on RT Sidebar, stay tuned.
Vapotherm does not practice medicine or provide medical services or advice. Any clinical recommendations provided herein are solely those of the speaker. Practitioners should refer to the full indications for use and operating instructions of any products referenced before use. Hosts and producers are paid employees or consultants of Vapotherm, and our guests are not compensated.